The government has this morning announced that New Zealand is amongst one of the first countries in the world to sign up for a new COVID-19 oral treatment. How will this new toolkit be used and in what sort of ways? We'll find out later in the program. Meanwhile, good news out of the Bay of Plenty. A retest on the Kati case has come back negative, as have the family test results. So just reiterating, a negative test, which is great. But please, and the Prime Minister will, I'm sure, reiterate this, still get vaccinated. Go and get vaccinated, regardless of what the result may be. Prime Minister, good morning.
Thank you. I 100% agree with what you've just said there, Ryan. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's talk about the level restriction sort of announcements or the review that goes on today, which will happen every week. On these numbers, 60 cases yesterday, very unlikely Auckland is going to see any movement on this roadmap thing, right?
So, yeah, 56 in Auckland, 3 in the Waikato, and of course the Bay of Plenty case that we previously reported, which you've just again clarified as a negative. So we'll be looking, Ryan, at the settings in Northland, in Auckland and in the Waikato, all in that Cabinet meeting today, and we'll report on all of them. You'll recall, though, what we said about Auckland was that we would, every week, look at how we were progressing, look at how, look at the cases, what was happening with the outbreak, look at vaccination levels, and I expect us to do that today. So no decisions have been taken. Dr Bloomfield will present to us. We'll use our latest update.
But, I mean, basically what we're saying is Bay of Plenty likely to go level 2? Because that was a false case.
Bay of Plenty, of course, you remember, we treated Bay of Plenty like Palmerston North. So because we knew very early on, we picked up that individual in our regular testing regime, good contact tracing, asymptomatic, we felt we could treat it like Palmerston North. So that Bay of Plenty, of course, lots of testing we were encouraging, but at that one we felt confident we could maintain their alert levels where they were. It's of course Northland and the Waikato that have been affected by alert level changes, and the other ones we'll be considering.
And Northland,
it's a lot to keep track of.
Can we try and clarify with Northland what is going on there? Did Harry Tam, you said some bits of Winston Peters' story are wrong. Harry Tam says he was not in Northland. Did Harry Tam or the
what I said was there was no evidence to support some of the claims that were being made.
Okay, which claims?
And the claims around this being someone being escorted by a male, we've only got evidence that this was an individual who travelled with a woman. We have CCTV footage that demonstrates that. We also know that the place where they were staying, the hotel accommodation, reported that it was simply 2 women travelling. So there was nothing to suggest there was any other individuals we needed to be seeking. And of course, a claim was made, as you pointed out, about an individual, and they themselves have said they have not been in the Northland region.
But I think people are wondering about
what I was referring to.
Right, but the false documents that we used to get across the border, is Harry Tam or the mongrel mob's name involved in any of this?
No, not to the best of my knowledge, no. I haven't seen any individual documentation, but what I've been advised is this individual made claims about the purposes for which they were travelling.
What were those claims?
About the nature of their essential work and so on. I'm actually not I don't actually have all of that detail. I've had it described to me, but essentially none of it relates to claims around working for gangs or anything like that, working for or within a gang as far as I'm aware.
Was it something to do with social work? They were going there as a social worker. Can you tell us what they said they were doing?
So again, I think the best way for me to describe it is that they made a falsified claim about their need to travel and whether or not it was legitimate travel. And so if you don't mind, Ryan, because I haven't seen all of that documentation, I don't want to be too speculative in case I give information that's not 100% accurate. But again, they provided information that enabled them to travel that we've since determined was inaccurate and should not have been able to travel.
Okay. Were they either of them sex workers, and do you consider that to be a high-risk occupation when it comes to the spread of COVID?
I've been advised that there is no evidence to suggest that they are.
Right. So,
and also, that would not be the basis on which someone would be able to travel, no. No,
I wouldn't think so. But nonetheless, if that was the purpose of the visit, if that is what was going on in Northland, I think...
There's been no evidence to suggest that that was the case here, and that's advice I've been given by the police.
Okay, so what were they doing up there?
That's not something that I believe we've been at this stage necessarily able to fully establish. Of course, you will have seen the movements we've been able to release. We know that they obviously were accommodated, that they've gone to petrol stations. We know that they obviously went to a testing station in order to be tested. I'm assuming that's because they would have been advised that that would be necessary. But beyond that, we've had a real lack of cooperation. That's why we have involved the police in this case. And so that's also one of the reasons we've taken a cautious approach. Incredibly frustrating, because you will have seen in almost every other situation, we do rely on people sharing with us where they have been and what they have been doing and whom they have been with. Here we've had to rely on gathering together evidence of their movements, using, for instance, CCTV footage to establish where they've been and with whom.
Bloody annoying is the way you would put it, Prime Minister, for everyone, and yourself included.
Yes.
Can we talk about Auckland coming out or reducing some of those restrictions that we currently find ourselves under? Can you give us step two, basically? Can you give us an indication of what percentage of Auckland needs to be vaccinated in order for us to start loosening some of the restrictions? Because every other place, I mean, you look at Sydney, you look at Melbourne, they have these sort of targets. At the moment, we're all sitting in lockdown still with no targets, no idea. So can you give us an idea this morning?
And also, in the many conversations I've had with other countries who have used targets, they have all said to me, don't use targets. And one of the reasons is because they've found that when they've reached those places, they haven't necessarily been in the right place in order to remove, or, who knows, there may be circumstances in which we could move earlier. So, Ryan, the message for Auckland is we will take into consideration two things. Vaccination rates, we already know that they are making a difference. They've reduced this outbreak by up to 50%, according to some modelling. The higher we go, the greater impact it will have on the outbreak and our ability to keep stamping it out. The second thing we'll take into account is the outbreak itself, the numbers that we see, our ability to continue to control it. We're still taking the same approach today that we took on day one. We aggressively contact trace, we aggressively try and manage,
so what
we
numbers?
Aggressively try and associate every single one. But if we see, for instance, restrictions not being complied with or followed, and we see an increase in cases, that makes it very, very difficult for us to continue to be aggressive, which is why we need both at the moment, and we need everyone's help.
Okay, so how many cases is too many?
The reason we've said, though, that generally we want 90 plus, if I may, Ryan, we have said we want to reach 90 plus, but I haven't said that's where we need to be in order to make small easements, like, for instance, that's phase 2, which is retail, because actually we might be in a position to move earlier than that. That's what we're continuing to consider as we go, but I still encourage everyone, we need those high rates, so please keep going out. We've got, I think it's 4% we need to hit Auckland at first doses at 90%, so just keep it up.
All right. What about the Māori vaccination rate, which, if you look at it around the rest of the country, is under 60%? And Penny Henare, who's your Associate Health Minister, was on this program late last week. He told us he wouldn't be comfortable with that Auckland border being relaxed while the Māori vaccination rate was different to the average for all ethnicities. Do you agree with him?
Well, Māori rates, and actually generally the rate across New Zealand generally is too low as well, including, of course, yes, we do want to see an increase in those Māori rates. But what I'd point to there is actually our over 65 rate for Māori is very high. So that demonstrates it is absolutely achievable. We just need to keep up the momentum that we've got at the moment. First doses amongst Māori has made up over 20% of our first doses in recent days. So that does demonstrate that that work that everyone's doing on the ground is making a difference. And we are up, my recollection is 60% now first doses.
Yes.
So we are seeing movement.
But
we need to continue that pace and be very aggressive.
That's a commitment from you this morning that you won't open that Auckland border until the Māori vax rates.
I know we play this game every single week. I have never made specific targets against vaccination and specific moves on alert levels, on borders, on anything, for the very reason you've just articulated. It is always more nuanced than that. We need to take into account what's happening in age bands. If you don't have enough older people vaccinated, if you've got too many in particular age groups like our 20 to 29s, then you'll have an outbreak amongst that age group, and taking into account ethnicity as well. A blanket number tells you a bit, but certainly not enough to make decisions.
All right, just finally on Afghanistan, Prime Minister, we've spoken to a couple of very passionate Kiwis this morning who want to get these up to 1,000 New Zealanders and those with visas out of Afghanistan. Finally, they say they've got a meeting with Nanaia Mahuta. Are you making a commitment to these people, or are we just saying hopefully?
We always have, Ryan. And in fact, what you've just said there, those visas are the ones that we have deliberately issued because those are individuals who have supported New Zealand's efforts, and amongst them are also some humanitarian visas we've issued to the likes of those who work in the space of human rights or within the judiciary with a particular focus on women. So those 1,200 visas, they are the visas that we have issued over the course of this crisis and include the people who worked for the New Zealand Defence Force or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade or were associated with them and we consider to be at risk as a consequence. Since we ceased that evacuation effort, there have been some from Afghanistan who have been able to make it to New Zealand. We continue to support those efforts, including working alongside third countries, but there are some details that, because they're specific around people's exit routes, I just won't go into because we don't want to jeopardise anyone's safety or some of the work we continue to do.
All right.